Good afternoon. It's Lee Cassidy from Tactile Technology with my in the hot seat with Lee Cassidy. So, what I want to do is just give you a couple of things that we're doing today before I bring in my guest, Steve Giguere. So, first thing. On tomorrow, we're going to do a piece at 2 o'clock about cloud native security, which is quite in vogue because that's what we're going to be talking about a little bit with Steve's background in a few minutes anyway. Then on Thursday, we're doing a in the hot seat with the Goldman Sachs 10,000 program for small business, and we've got Jonathan Sanderson from joining us to go through that and his experiences with the Goldman Sachs program and how he's taken the learning from that and utilised that within his organisation. On Friday, we are also doing a piece around environmental. So Your Environment Friday, it's all about environmental sensing, understanding things like temperature, humidity, many other things, and we'll cover off a few things there. And then back on Monday, we're doing a Small Business Monday, and we're going to talk about ransomware. And we've got Paul Cherry, my business partner, join us because we've done quite a lot of work recently with a number of organisations around ransomware and issues that people have with that. So what I'm going to do is bring in our guest now. So let me just get ready for that, and then I shall bring in Steve. Hi, Steve. How are you?
I'm great. I didn't know you did all those things. So I just
we do a few different things each day. We did have a completely different schedule that was focused around particular technologies, but we've actually changed it now. So we've got a small business focus, an enterprise focus, and also an environmental focus, plus two different interview sets. One, with people like yourself. It's all general technology that's in our space. But on a Thursday, because I did the Goldman Sachs program myself back in 2017. We're actually going through a lot of businesses that have been through that process and how they've benefited from it.
Cool.
Yeah, like we had Tim Peake on the latest session where people had actually gone through and finished yesterday. So it was quite interesting talking about his experiences and things as we're all going through the process and kicking off into business with the Goldman Sachs piece yesterday. So anyway, welcome aboard, and tell us a little bit about yourself. I know I've got it wrong, haven't I? Because I've been calling you an American in my preambles with this, but you're not at all. You're actually from north of the border, I believe. Yeah, the Maple Leaf territory. So you are a Canadian, not an American. So tell us a little bit about you, your background growing up and things, and how you ended up moving into technology.
Oh, wow. Okay. Wow, we're going way back, Lee. Jeez.
Yeah. Well, it'd be further back for me.
Yeah. Let's leave the numbers out of it. I was born in northern Ontario, a town called Sault Ste. Marie. This has a very French-sounding name, but it's not in Quebec. It's in Ontario. So, if you consider, if you visualize why I moved 3,500 miles away from it, like 10 feet of snow now would be no big deal. So super happy not to be doing that anymore. That was my formative years in Northern Ontario. And then I went to university at Carleton in Ottawa in still in Ontario, but still in Ontario, 500 miles further east.
Yeah, it's a big country, isn't it?
It's a big country. That was the nearest major university. Essentially, I had to go 500 miles to get to it. And then from there, I studied systems and computer engineering. That's what it was called at the time. It was essentially a mixed bag of all aspects of engineering in combination with control systems, networking, and real-time systems. So that was in the 90s. That was before the internet almost. And from there, I got really into control systems and quality. So I was writing a lot of real-time coding in C. My sort of early claim to fame in the 80s was getting thrown out of my high school because we had a Unix system that was insecure, and I elevated privilege. I changed the teacher's password to Peaches that somebody told on me, and they threw me out. I know, right? Who can you trust?
Yeah.
But anyway,
I remember doing
I had a
something
real job.
similar in the when I was
Yeah.
in the RF. We used to work in operations, and we used to use a mainframe for ops communication, and we were actually quite good at logging in and playing games on one of the main mainframe systems, which we shouldn't have been doing at all. But some of the old the missile command games you could do that were semi-visual, lines on a screen, which was very similar. So what
What do
happened? Were you actually kicked out then for that, or
I,
just a severe reprimand?
no, I was banned from all computing in the high school. So my father, being a champion of myself and my computing future, had a real tore the principal a new one for that one, I might say, and got me enlisted into an adult high school as an alternative, where the teacher of the high school knew less than I did. So he just said, let's just program stuff in C. Cool. And I'll give you an A. We good? All right, we're good. So that's what we did. That was my early days. By the time I had a job in the 90s, I'd already been coding in C for almost 10 years. And so I had a huge head start. And that was great. I did all that. I did some work for Rolls-Royce, which is how I ended up in the UK. I ended up kind of babysitting some really middleware instrumentation interfaces that normalized data from high-speed data acquisition systems for Rolls-Royce that made sure that the engines that keep you safe in the air were going to work. Scary, right?
Ah, very scary. I may think about when I fly again.
Well, I've got aspects of code in automobile telephony and aero quality systems. So just don't leave the house.
Yeah, interesting, interesting. So what happened after Rolls Royce then, and how long ago was that?
Rolls-Royce was when I first moved to the UK. That was in 1999. It was a one-year contract to make sure it all worked. I was going to leave, and I could leave at any time. 20 years later, I've been through Motorola. I've done, well, that was call control systems. And then I got into automobile systems where I worked with like Jag Land Rover and Ford um, in there. It's really interesting, actually, that part of my life, because if you read Gene Kim's The Phoenix Project, and you look where it comes from, which is the goal, which talks about Toyota's process control and verification. So the foundations of DevOps, I would lived through that transformation at Ford as they adapted all of those process control mechanisms through their pipeline, essentially, to the point where they could eliminate what we would call pen testing, what they would call hot testing. So I saw that real world transformation because I was part of the software lifecycle there. And then I moved into the DevOps world and I went, whoa, somebody wrote a
Yeah.
book on this. I know exactly what you're talking about. So that was pretty cool. That's kind of what got me into this world I'm in now.
Yeah, so I remember the Motorola side of things because on simulators we used to use some of the 68,000 chips to do some of the processing. Like we used to have pipeline processors for image generation for simulation. So I remember using some of those in that process, and it was like racks and racks worth of stuff. Not what we see today in single board machines and things. Quite a different situation. So how did you get into security then? How long ago was that?
So kind of like the turn of the DevOps life world movement, I got a job because I was focusing on quality and safety and things like that. And then I got a job working at Coverity, which was a startup at the time. And they were all about code quality, specifically in C and C++, which was kind of my strength, or one of code strengths. And they were subsequently acquired by a company called Synopsys. Synopsys created their software integrity group and decided to pivot Coverity from quality to security. And from there, it was like, oh, wow, this is really cool. Like, this is so much more interesting. And they were kind enough to fund like training courses and um, OWASP hands-on pen testing and all sorts of certifications, like all of the early stage things, like almost boot camp-ish, getting the people who are the field architects into security from there. And then it was just, the way it is. You learn as you go. You trial by fire, and and then they acquired new things. So then I ended up with experience with static analysis tools, software composition analysis, interactive application security testing, pen testing, threat modeling, like the whole wide world of security was like that was did that for about 3-4 years. And then containerization came along.
Yeah.
Kind of messed everybody up, didn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. I remember things before containerization of Linux on mainframes, which was a long time ago. So containers have been around, but in a different way, because we were trying to utilize large amounts of compute capacity to actually separate it off into smaller workloads. So you could do that on an IBM. You could actually create a container and run Linux in a container on a mainframe, which was quite different. But the new type of containers is for a different reason. It's all about trying to, create agile development in DevOps. It's all about reducing the granularity and having smaller pieces of compute, so you can actually create microservices. That's the real drive behind it, isn't it?
It's one of the many drives. Yeah, there's a lot of advantages to, you can say, containerization, or just what would now be loosely defined as a cloud native perspective on development. And I think, well, if you look at when Docker first came out, they said build once, run anywhere. And if you were part of a development team beforehand, and if I look at, say, the Motorola days, it was build once, runs on my desktop, doesn't run anywhere else. That was the world we were in. So the ability to containerize and carry those dependencies with you, wow, like that was incredible. That was that was day one, mind blowing. Of course, then it had to scale, and then suddenly that was a problem. And then we've been layering solutions on as the entire thing has matured. But that was one of the original I'd say challenges for which that was the solution.
Yeah, because we didn't have orchestrators as much then. It was mainly just the actual containers. Because I remember going to a VMworld session, and they were talking about containers, how you could run them within VMware, and talking about things, difference between chickens and cats as a description of containers and virtual machines. A number of years ago, this was, but it was very, very early days, and very few people were actually utilizing them in production. But really, over the last couple of years, 2-3 years, that's changed quite a lot, hasn't it? And very similar to that virtualization thing. When it first started out, a very small number of companies were actually utilizing them, and then that increase and that wave came through. And we seem to have the same thing now with containerization, that wave coming through. But I think sometimes you have to forget that it's not that long ago that things like Kubernetes, from an orchestration perspective, was released. Because that was a Google technology, wasn't it? Was it about 5-6 years ago it was released?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it was called the Borg. It had a bunch of different names, and then it was open source, which is actually the open sourcing of Kubernetes was super.
Oh, yeah, because was it Core OS originally?
Well, that's a different thing. That was more a container centric OS. That's slightly different. That's a part of the continue. Yeah. Anyway, but we can get into that if you want. But
no. So let's go back to you and your security. So you've gone through all this training in security, pen testing, and a variety of other things. So what came next?
Oh, well, getting to the sort of later stages of Synopsys, which still was very good at securing all that world. I ended up in a conversation where somebody said, "Well, we're going to use Kubernetes and we're going to containerize everything. What can you do for us there?" And at that time, the answer was, "Oh, nothing." And we'd already seen that shifting to microservice meant that smaller code bases were actually written better. So static analysis tools started to have a limited effect. Some of the original application security gates, they didn't really work that well in a cloud native and containerization space. So I started to rethink how this was going to work, and almost in like an Alexa's listening, other devices are available kind of way. I ran into containerized and security solutions, of which there's loads, right? And I work now at StackRox. I used to work at Aqua Security and it was like, oh, this is how you do it. Now I'm like, right, okay, so there are dedicated startups in this space because it is a gap. So now
Yeah.
it's like, all right, so I've done all this, I've got to jump into this, because the whole securing of Kubernetes containers, cloud native, this is another world, and I want to learn more about it. So that was what drew me over.
Okay, so the old way of doing security was just, north-south, stopping people getting into your network, wasn't it? Firewalls were the main area that people focused on. People might segment, especially in a virtualized environment, by having top-of-rack firewalls as well to split the racks up. But when we're doing things in very virtual environments, it's difficult to do that. And I think there was a new wave of people starting to use microsegmentation technologies. I know VMware use their NSX technology to do that, and there are a variety of others out there. But when we come to this new container centric, this cloud native, it's much more difficult, isn't it, to be able to see what's there as well. I think that's a challenge, understanding what's there, but also the dynamic nature of it, because it's changing all the time, because you can have pods disappear and reappear. You can have replicas, and with scaling, so it's a very different environment. So there are some real challenges, I think, in this space.
Oh yeah, completely. There's a demonstration that I started doing last year, when eBPF as a technology for using the kernel to monitor behavior came out, and there was an eBPF program that could monitor all processes running on a VM or on a bare metal. It didn't really matter. You could do anything you want. You could see a nice stream of events that you could use for incident response or runtime, and then you could start a container that just had a shell in it, and you could exec into the container. Now, because the container is a single process, it's in its own Linux namespace. It has its own, and so then you could start, but you give yourself root access inside the container, which gives yourself root access on the host, and you don't obey any of the good security practices for images or containerization, and you mount everything you need inside the container, and now your activity is completely concealed. I could do all the same things, and this eBPF monitoring tool just sat there silent, as if I wasn't doing anything, because all it saw was the container start. So it was just trying to very basically expose the black box of what containers represented, and then containers now being orchestrated, and new nodes, or new, let's say, whatever those nodes represent, being controlled by an orchestrator like Kubernetes. Okay, so now you've got what used to be a person controlling a data center. You've got an automation tool controlling all of the environment within which your containers, which are now pods, are running. Now you've got a whole other network paradigm going on. You mentioned microsegmentation. That used to mean one thing, and yet the same terminology is being used again to manage the networking within a Kubernetes cluster.
Yeah.
So just even in terms of just naming conventions, what you can see, what you can't see, it's confusing a lot of people, particularly in the security area. And it's almost being, to some extent, it's being ignored in the non-security area, right? Because these tools were designed to promote ease, velocity, scale, all of the things that organizations love because it means they stay ahead of the competition. Developers love because it's cutting edge. But it can be a bit of a nightmare for security teams who had methods, like you said, build big walls, build a moat.
Yeah, but sometimes those big walls don't work anyway, as we've heard with the recent situation with solar winds and a backdoor being used to get into corporate networks. If there's a will, there's a way, isn't there? And I believe that was done by effectively using an update that was generated within SolarWinds to get into people's networks. So what you think is really secure in a big wall sometimes isn't. Yeah.
Yeah, and there is a significant increase also in supply chain attacks in Docker Hub, in public images. People are intentionally putting images up there that kind of type squat on the names of commonly used images so that they get found by accident. They may have the exact same content functionally,
Yeah.
but they have some bonus content that may not be doing exactly what you think. That's one method of attack that really scaled up last year. But yeah, supply chain is one great example, but also the old traditions of phishing that just get you access to the developer's laptop like that. the basics still apply in terms of attacks.
Yeah. So, what do you think are the biggest challenges for people in this space? Then, is it the complexity of it all? Is it because the dynamic nature of it, or is it a people and process issue? What do you think the real problems are for people in this space?
Well, I generally like to start with people and culture, and that's agnostic of whatever your security technology or even your deployment technology is. It doesn't have to be Kubernetes. The idea that developers aren't educated, for one, generally, it's getting a lot better, but um, they don't come out of their education with security as a built-in thing. It's not ubiquitous in the way that safety is part of. Well, I mentioned the Toyota, the Ford, the other industries where safety is built in, right? You wouldn't have it any other way. It wouldn't make sense without that. That part of security, that's not part of our software development world. So that would be great if we, and it is starting, if from the ground up we started teaching security hand in hand. And then when you're trying to get into those worlds, it would just be a lot better generally. But the problems now, of course, are that if you were to ask 5 years ago, you already said 5 years ago. If you asked somebody, where do you think your technologies or stacks going to be in 5 years? Most people would have had an opinion. Probably 100% of them would have been wrong. Like, unless you're in deep IoT where things change maybe a little slower. Most of the people I was speaking to were programming in Java and were still writing monolith applications, maybe with an idea of microservice. The idea that Kubernetes would have won the orchestrator war and would be so dominant right now, that was hard to predict. And it represents something that just means, well, for one, it means a lot more in everything is code, which is good, but it just means the whole way of flipping your head around in terms of security. So it's just knowing what the differences are. That's a big challenge. And you mentioned awareness, starting with awareness and then building on top of that, because you can't stop what you can't see.
Yeah, and say that being ex-military, it's all about people, and ensuring that people understand what their responsibilities are. That everybody is involved in security, and you don't just turn a blind eye to things. You need to do something about it, and I think that's one of the problems with the cultural side of things. That people in the development side think it's the security people's problem, and vice versa. But it's actually really everybody's job, to make to build on the security, isn't it? So, and that's a critical thing. And I think one of the other problems I see in this space now is because of this agile nature of development, as a process. So we're moving really quickly because we're trying to develop something really quickly and get it out, as quickly as possible. So, weekly or 2 weekly, sprints of development and getting a new function delivered or an update delivered is quite common. And I think we were talking not so long back, but there are people that are doing releases daily. So some people are going even faster than that. So being able to keep up with what's needed is a challenge, isn't it? Trying to keep up with that security requirement because of the speed of it as well.
Oh yeah, I mean so you mentioned there are some. I've actually went into a conversation with a large organization, and I asked, well, what's people say continuous integration and continuous deployment, whatever you want, depending on what the D stands for in your definition of CI/CD, and it's what does continuous mean? For some people, it means, because people who used to be monthly, for them daily feels continuous. Some people who used to be daily, and I think there was a stat that, because I'm following AWS reInvent, their time from code to deploy is 11 seconds. So you're talking, how do you secure that?
Yeah.
So it's, and I had a conversation today with an e-commerce platform that said theirs was 4 minutes. So you've got to, how do you assess the delta, give it a risk profile, and decide what security controls to apply in a 4-minute time frame. So there's a lot of what's going on at the moment. There's a lot of blue-green deployments or canary deployments. People are deploying in a way where they acknowledge there's risk, and they almost kind of crowdsource the results by deploying in a particular region, and that's good. That They're understanding risk, and that is risk is there, and they have a method for it. And they also understand the mechanism of doing this, of deploying securely, is in fact Kubernetes. They're leveraging Kubernetes and what is possible, and new service meshes like Istio, for creating secure deployment methods, because that's making up for the velocity. Now, our challenge as security professionals is to look at that pipeline and go, all right, well, what can we do earlier? And yeah, that's what
Yeah,
we're working.
so
Yeah.
I've spoken to a number of people about when they think about security in the site lifecycle, and they say they think of it in the development stage, but they don't actually do anything there. They think about it and they're considering what they need to do, but when they actually do anything there, it's normally as it comes out the sausage machine into production that they're actually doing something. But the trouble, like you say, because it's coming out so quickly now, how much time have you got to actually do any security and test it? It's quite limited, isn't it? And I think a lot of the processes are now fully automated, so everything's been pushed out automated. So really, you need to be automating the other end, the security aspects, which again is not common to people in that security space. That's not normal for them in that SecOps environment, is it? It's becoming more important to them, and I think it'll be the way that they have to do things in the future. And I think, also, if you think about automation, it gives you two things. One is speed, but it also gives you consistency, which I think is a really good thing in this space as well.
You got it. Like you're hitting the nail on the head. The one of the biggest advantages we have now that we are using, maybe not utilizing enough in terms of security, is that we're provisioning cloud and clusters using code. So you use things like Terraform. Okay, so can I check to make sure before it becomes provisioned that my provisioning declaration is actually secure? There are ways of doing that. All right, so my application is written in YAML. It contains images that were written in a Docker file, which contains dependencies which were written in a requirements.txt, say if it's Python, which was written in code. So it's code within code within code within code. Cool. If I can make sure that I check all of that, that's fast to check. Declarative declarations are very quick to check. Seconds, and they even fit within this high velocity space. So if you can do that before it goes live, then you've got Kubernetes, which is the entire job of Kubernetes, not the entire job, but mostly the job of Kubernetes is to maintain a declarative definition of what my application needs to be doing. If I think of, well, why don't I use it to maintain a declarative definition of what my secure application should be doing? So now we're utilizing all of these things that we've created to make applications faster and better, because automation does that and doing as code does that. Now I can secure in a deterministic way. I know that I'm deploying as a secure thing as opposed to doing it and checking after the fact. And I think that's the that's the new education we need to talk about.
So coming on to the future then, so what do you think the next wave of things is going to be? I know you've been looking at some of the things that are coming out of AWS reInvent at the moment, and there are lots of other things going on in the background. What do you think the new things that people have got to be considering, and what's exciting you technology-wise at the moment?
Anything that lends itself to that. So I already mentioned, for runtime, it's very difficult to do things in the Kubernetes space, and things that leverage eBPF is very exciting. If you see that there's even, well, everything's got a con these days, a convention. So there's conventions around eBPF solely, which is great. I think that's a fantastic technology for determining your runtime, but reducing your runtime and creating things as code. GitOps last year was like, oh, what's GitOps? That's cool. I like the sound of that. Well, that's navigating the world as code. So, and that has become huge. If you look at, well, Weaveworks is a great example. They're huge, let's say, proponents of GitOps, and that is something that lends itself to this world that we want people to use, because if they create a declarative GitOps world, then that's a world we can secure, and that's a world we can secure quickly. So yeah, huge fan. I think that's already kind of blowing up, and it's just going to be 2021 is going to be the year of GitOps.
So what about yourself? I'm going to say it's a new world for you with StackRox. When did you start? It was just couple of months ago, was it?
November 1st. I like things to be
Oh,
on the.
so yeah, so not that long ago. So I'm sure it's still a learning exercise to understand, what's being offered by the organisation, and things. So how long is it going to? You think it's going to get you up to speed? Because you've only really been at it a month or so now, haven't you?
Well, I came from a similar technology to a different way of doing things at StackRox. I liked StackRox because they were leveraging Kubernetes. That was their whole thing. They saw the power of Kubernetes can do a lot for you from a security perspective if you follow a very simple set of practices. And so I just like that perspective. So it hasn't taken that long to get up to speed. Um, I think what I'm really focusing now at StackRox is community. So, talking to people like yourself and meeting people in a similar space, bringing them all together so that we have a community that focuses on cloud native and Kubernetes security. So I think that's my current, I guess you could say, I don't want to say passion. Passion sounds so corny, doesn't it?
True.
But that's what I'm going for right now. I'm looking to create a meetup, ideally live someday, but virtual if not. But certainly talking to more people in the space. I've had some really good conversations, yourself included. But yeah, I'm looking to build community that is not just cloud native, not just DevOps, but has that security angle the whole time, so that you know
Yeah.
the idea of DevSecOps isn't just an illusion; it is a thing.
Well, I think it's really important, that community involvement, to get people's views and perspectives and real world examples of the challenges they've had, and then bring those back into an organisation so you can deliver better. And I think a lot of people have tried to do development of products and services in isolation, based on what they think is required, rather than having that community based focus on understanding. I think that's, if you look at the open source community, that's how it's been driven, because people are talking and understanding the requirements and working together to do something there. A lot of enterprise organizations developing software or hardware technologies don't always harness that understanding and need within the community, do they? Or they do it not as well, some of them.
I completely agree. I did a talk a couple of weeks ago. We were talking about it earlier of DevSecOps days, where I spoke about one of the one of the shortcomings of some organizations is that even though all startups start off the back of community and innovation, they're filling a gap that the community was shouting about, and so they did something about it. But as they grow, they consider what they've done a bit of intellectual property, and value and investment kind of twists that, taints that the objective, and they stop asking the community as collaborators into their innovation, how can this be better? And I think that's a mistake, and that's not that. So I fully think that every organization should be looking at how to build community around not just their product. I mean, it's a no-brainer to have it around their product so that users can share notes and compare experiences, but just around the drivers. So around like cloud native and Kubernetes security, I think the more you do that, the better everything becomes.
Yeah. So, what about your future? Do you think you're going to stay in this space for the future, or have you got plans to do your own thing, or anything else? Or your early days into your StackRox career, work, but have you got some thoughts for the future? Are you going to move back to Canada? You're going to stay here? You love it so much. What's the future bring for you?
I actually really do like being over here. I like the UK. I like being so close to Europe. So I don't have any plan, in spite of what my wife might like, to go back to Canada. She's British, and she once told her mother that she married me because she's like, yes, I've got my ticket back to Canada. 15 years later, we're still here.
Yeah.
But uh, I don't know. I wouldn't profess any more than I would say, where do you think where do you think will be guiding technology in 3 years? I would be wrong, like the 5 years ago prediction thing.
Yeah.
I am very much. I try and be proactive. I try and keep my eyes open. I have strong opinions held loosely. Anything can change. So I will be trying to keep ahead of the curve and then following whatever the new exciting technology is. I do. I will still be in security because that bug I have, and I find the whole thing entirely fascinating. I love the show you said about ransomware. I'm going to be tuning in. I wrote a whole article on ransomware like during the WannaCry year, so that was entirely fascinating. So yeah,
Yeah.
we'll still be in security doing something.
Yeah, that was quite interesting, wasn't it? And it was
Yeah.
down to a lot of people not being able to protect their environments because they were utilizing old technology. Windows XP, especially in the NHS, they couldn't really keep them up to date. They weren't patching them, so there were lots of vulnerabilities, and that's how allowed that that to happen. Plus, someone stealing a load of good tools from the NSA as well to start it out. So, and it sounds like the similar things are going on at the moment because there's a bit more to it with this piece that happened with SolarWinds, because wasn't it found out by one of the security companies that had some testing tools that looked for vulnerabilities. They actually identified what had happened and how it had come in through SolarWinds in the first place.
Yep.
So
yeah, it's interesting. I think it'll get more interesting as
is
the years
it Surefire? I can't remember the name of the company now. Is it
I'm not gonna look it
Surefire?
up.
Yeah, I say it was tied to them. They'd had a breach, and they started investigating what had happened, and they came across that it actually had come through SolarWinds, raise the attention to that, and then we find out that Department of Homeland Security and a number of other US agencies have had similar things. But if that's happened to them and they're utilizing it, was done through an update through SolarWinds. How many other thousands of organizations are using SolarWinds at the moment and could be in a very similar situation?
Exactly. FireEye, is that what you're looking for?
FireEye, that was it. FireEye.
Yeah.
I knew it had fire in it. I couldn't remember, the name of it, but I read an article. I think it was this morning or yesterday, and they were talking about how they'd, through that process of investigation, how they'd been breached. They then found out about this situation with SolarWinds, and then from there, that went on to the whole situation that's going on across all these different US departments and organisations. So, yeah, quite interesting. It's like that WannaCry event on the NHS again, isn't it? But a slightly different mechanisms being used to do it. But it sounds like this time it was also a government's hacking department that's done this. I'm not too sure exactly. It sounded like it was some kind of Russian government involvement in it. I have to be careful. I don't want to be attacked by the Russians or anything. Yeah, so I have to be careful, but it sounds like it. Yeah, but again, there are a lot of governments that are utilising these tools to actually get use it for espionage purposes and many other things. With their neighbours, not always friendly neighbours. So, anyway, it's been great to talk to you, Steve. I'm sure we'll speak again, but thank you very much for joining me today. And good luck with your time at StackRox. And we're really looking forward to working with you, with our customers that are looking at these type of technologies and how we can utilize them to make them more secure.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks ever so much. Bye then.